The night Fiona Walsh almost got fired for eating leftover risotto in the walk-in cooler was the same night she met the man who would turn her entire life upside down. She hadn't meant to stay late. The restaurant closed at 10, and by 10:45, the last of the servers had grabbed their coats and disappeared into the Chicago cold. Fiona was supposed to leave with them. Instead, she found herself in the kitchen, standing in front of the stainless steel shelf where Chef Marcello left the family meal scraps. Tonight, a full container of truffle risotto that nobody had touched, telling herself she'd just take one bite before heading to the train. She hadn't eaten since noon. Her feet hurt. And it was the kind of Tuesday in November where the wind off the lake cuts right through your jacket like it has a personal grudge. So she sat down on an overturned milk crate near the prep station, pulled off her non-slip shoes, and started eating directly out of the container with a plastic spoon. It was, objectively, the best thing she'd eaten in weeks. Fiona Walsh was 29 years old, 5'4", and had been working as a line cook at Marin, one of Chicago's most quietly prestigious restaurants, for 8 months. Before that, she'd spent 2 years at a bistro in Wicker Park that served brunch until 3 in the afternoon and had a wait time of 45 minutes on weekends. She was good at her job. She was fast, clean, consistent. She could break down a chicken in under 3 minutes, and she never burned a beurre blanc. What she could not do, apparently, was save money in a city like Chicago on a line cook's salary while also helping her mother with medical bills in Cincinnati. She didn't think about that now. She thought about the risotto. She was halfway through the container when the back door opened. Fiona looked up. A man in a dark wool coat stood in the doorway to the service entrance, snow melting in his dark hair, looking at her with an expression that suggested he was trying to figure out if he'd walked into the wrong building. She looked at him. He looked at her. She looked down at the container in her lap. "I'm not stealing it," she said. "It was going to get thrown out." The man stepped inside and let the door close behind him. He was tall, not absurdly so, but tall enough that he had to angle slightly to avoid the hanging pot rack. He looked to be somewhere in his late 30s. His coat was the kind that didn't have a brand logo anywhere visible, which somehow made it more expensive looking than if it had. "I didn't say you were stealing anything," he said. "You were thinking it. I was thinking you looked cold." Fiona stared at him. "Who are you?" "I know Gerard," he said. "The owner. He said I could come by after close to pick something up from his office. He gave me a key, held it up, a small brass key on a plain ring. My name is Grant Holloway." She'd heard the name before, vaguely. Something about real estate, or maybe hospitality investment. Gerard had mentioned a silent partner once. In the offhand way, he mentioned things he didn't want to explain. "Fiona," she said. "Line cook, you have good taste," Grant said, nodding at the container. "It's truffle risotto. You'd have to work hard to make it bad. Marcello manages it occasionally." She almost laughed. She caught it at the last second, turned it into a breath. "Don't tell him I said that. Wouldn't dream of it." Grant didn't move toward the office. He stayed near the door, which she appreciated. He wasn't crowding the room. He glanced around the kitchen the way someone, when there's a place they've only heard described, noticing the things that don't show up in photographs. The scorch mark above the salamander. The shelf where someone had taped a handwritten note that said "Last person to leave term off the oven, Derek." "Is it always this quiet at night? After close?" "Yeah. It's my favorite time, honestly." She scraped the last of the risotto from the corner of the container. No tickets coming in, no one calling out, no one burning the garnish. "You like it here?" "I like cooking. I tolerate everything else." He smiled. It changed his face considerably. The seriousness of it lifted for a moment, and he looked more like a person and less like a painting of one. "That's a very honest answer. It's late and I'm tired. Honest is what you get." He went to get whatever he'd come for. She heard him in the hallway, the sound of a door opening and closing, and she rinsed the container in the sink, dried it, left it on the shelf, and put her shoes back on. By the time he came back, she'd pulled on her coat and was wrapping her scarf around her neck with the mechanical efficiency of someone who has made peace with Chicago winters. "You're taking the train?" Grant asked. "Red line. I can drive you. I don't get in cars with strangers." "You just sat in a dark kitchen eating someone else's risotto and didn't seem particularly concerned." "That was a calculated risk," Fiona said. "I know where the knives are," he laughed, an actual laugh, not the polite kind. "Fair point." She left. She walked the 4 blocks to the station with her hands in her pockets and the wind doing its worst, and she thought about the way he'd said fair point, and she told herself it didn't matter. It mattered a little. She saw him again 3 weeks later. It was a Saturday night, the restaurant fully booked, and Fiona was 40 minutes into a brutal service when Gerard appeared at the pass and said quietly, that his investor was in the dining room and he wanted the lamb course to be perfect. "It's always perfect," Fiona said without looking up. "More perfect than usual." She sent out the lamb. It was perfect. More perfect than usual, if she was being honest, which she usually was. She didn't think about it again until Gerard came back after service and said Grant Holloway had asked who was responsible for the lamb. "What did you tell him?" "I told him it was my best line cook and that I wasn't going to share her with him." "That's flattering and slightly ominous. He wants to meet you. Officially. We've met." Gerard looked at her. "He didn't mention that." She shrugged. "Tell him the lamb sends its regards." She heard nothing for another week. Then Grant came back. A Tuesday night again, quieter service, and this time Gerard brought him back to the kitchen, which was the kind of thing that made the whole kitchen straighten up and pretend to look busy in a way that was extremely obvious. "Miss Walsh," Gerard said, as if they were in a boardroom. "I believe you know Grant." "We've eaten risotto together," Fiona said without stopping what she was doing, which was reducing a pan of port wine sauce, loosely. She heard someone suppress a laugh. She suspected it was Grant. "I'll leave you to it," Gerard said, and disappeared back toward his office with the graceful evasion of a man who had created a situation he didn't want to stay for. Grant settled against the counter across from her station, far enough not to be in the way, close enough to talk. He'd come from somewhere. She could tell by the jacket and the slightly loosened tie. But he didn't have the manic energy of someone still in work mode. He looked tired, actually. The good kind of tired, the kind that comes after something genuinely difficult has been resolved. "The lamb," he said, "was exceptional, I know. You always answer compliments like that." "When they're true, yes. What's the point of pretending otherwise?" He considered that. "Most people say thank you and deflect. Most people are lying when they deflect. The lamb was exceptional. I worked on that preparation for 3 weeks. It would be weird to act surprised that it turned out well." He was quiet for a moment. She kept her eyes on the sauce, adjusting the heat by feel. "I'm opening a restaurant," Grant said. She looked up. "Not here," he added. "In Milwaukee, actually. New concept. Seasonal American, chef-driven, 60 covers. I've been looking for a sous chef who can eventually move into an executive chef role. Gerard says you're the best person he's worked with in 10 years, and he's worked with a lot of people." Fiona turned the heat down under the sauce. "Gerard is biased. Gerard is also not known for complimenting people he doesn't mean it about." That was true. She'd heard Gerard say exactly 3 kind things in 8 months, and 2 of them were about produce suppliers. "I'm not looking to leave," she said. "I'm not asking you to leave. I'm asking you to consider it. Those are the same thing, only if your answer is yes." He reached into his jacket and put a card on the counter beside her. Not in front of her, not pushed toward her, just set there neutrally, as if it were a piece of mise en place that might or might not be relevant. "Think about it. No pressure, no timeline." She looked at the card. She didn't pick it up. "I'll think about it," she said. He left. She finished the sauce. She picked up the card and put it in her apron pocket, and she didn't tell anyone about it. She thought about it for 6 days. She thought about her apartment in Pilsen with the radiator that made a sound like a dying clarinet between 3 and 4 in the morning. She thought about her mother's last phone call, the careful way her mother said, "Don't worry about it, sweetheart," when Fiona asked about the new prescription. She thought about the fact that she was 29 and she loved cooking and she was good at it, and she had never once in her life been given the chance to prove just how good she actually was. On the 7th day, she texted the number on the card. His response came back in 4 minutes. "Coffee?" "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. metric on Milwaukee Ave," she wrote back. "That's in Chicago," he wrote. "I know. I'm here until Thursday." She went. She ordered a black coffee and an egg sandwich, and she sat across from Grant Holloway in a corner booth and told him exactly what she wanted. Full creative control over the menu, a real budget, a staff she could help build from the start, and a timeline that wasn't insane. He didn't blink. He wrote some notes on his phone. He asked intelligent questions, not about her background or her training, which was on the resume he'd presumably already read, but about her philosophy, how she thought about a menu, how she handled a kitchen in crisis, what she thought most upscale American restaurants were getting wrong. "They're afraid of simplicity," she said. "They bury everything under technique to justify the price point. But the best thing I've ever eaten was a roasted chicken. It was just good chicken, good salt, good fat, cooked correctly. That was it. And it was transcendent." Grant had his coffee halfway to his mouth. He stopped. "Where was that?" "My grandmother's kitchen. She was from Tennessee." He put the coffee down. He was looking at her with the focused attention of someone who has just heard something that confirmed a theory they'd been developing for a long time. "That's the concept," he said. "What is that?" What you just said. That's the entire concept. She looked at him for a moment. You're basing a restaurant concept on my grandmother's chicken. I'm basing it on the idea that the most honest food is usually the most memorable food. Yes. He leaned forward slightly. Will you do it? She should have said she needed more time. She should have consulted someone, a mentor, a lawyer, anyone with more context than she had. Instead, she looked at the man across the table, who had listened to her talk about philosophy and simplicity and her grandmother's kitchen with genuine attention instead of polite tolerance. And she said, yes. But I'm serious about creative control. I know you are. That's why I want you, she told Gerard on a Thursday. He took it with the quiet pride of someone watching a student surpass them, which was generous of him and which she did not expect. She moved to Milwaukee in January. The restaurant, they were calling it Tillman's, after her grandmother's maiden name, which had been Grant's idea and which she had argued against and then loved, was supposed to open in April. They had 5 months, a full team to assemble, a menu to design, a space to build out. She worked harder than she had ever worked in her life. Grant was in Milwaukee too, sometimes 3 days a week. He was not a hovering presence. He gave her the space he'd promised, and when he had opinions, he offered them as questions rather than directives. But he was there often enough that they developed a rhythm, the two of them in the restaurant, and she began to understand that his attention was not the kind that diminished things, but the kind that sharpened them. He brought coffee without being asked. He remembered that she took it black with 1 sugar. He noticed when she was in the weeds on a decision and didn't push, just asked if she wanted to talk it through, and sometimes she did and sometimes she didn't, and he accepted both answers equally. She noticed him more than she should have. She noticed the way he worked, methodically, without drama, the kind of focus that comes from someone who has done hard things long enough to know that urgency and panic are different. She noticed that he had a quiet sense of humor that appeared unexpectedly, like a door opening in a wall you thought was solid. She noticed that he was generous with credit in meetings, specific when he said thank you, and incapable of small talk, which she found deeply sympathetic. She told herself it was professional respect. She told herself that approximately 40 times. It was Heather who figured it out. Heather Drummond was Fiona's pastry chef, 26 years old, originally from Portland, with a galaxy of tattoos and an unerring instinct for reading rooms and people. She had lasted exactly 9 days at Tillman's before she became the person Fiona trusted most, which was its own kind of record. You light up when he walks in, Heather said one afternoon matter-of-factly while piping ganache into test molds. I don't light up. It's very subtle. But yes, you do. He's my boss. He's your business partner. There's a difference, Heather. I'm just observing. She held a ganache mold up to the light. He does the same thing, for the record. Fiona stopped what she was doing. I haven't said anything to anyone, Heather added, setting the mold down. And I won't. But you should probably know, because you're a very practical person, and practical people generally make better decisions when they have all the relevant data. Fiona went back to what she was doing. She thought about that conversation for the rest of the week. Tillman's opened on April 9th. It was a Wednesday, which was an unusual choice for a restaurant opening, and it was Grant's idea on the grounds that a Tuesday or Wednesday opening was less pressure, and the first week of service should be for the staff to find their footing rather than for maximum exposure. Fiona had not expected to feel nervous. She felt nervous. She stood in the kitchen at 4 in the afternoon on opening day, looking at the mise-en-place laid out along the station with the exhaustive precision of someone who has checked it 4 times. And she felt a specific kind of fear that she recognized from the moments in her life when something she loved was about to be given to other people's judgment. Grant came in at 4:15. He saw her face and he didn't say anything reassuring, which was the right call. She hated being reassured. It made the fear worse, not better. He stood beside her and looked at the mise-en-place. Roasted chickens on the menu, he said. Obviously, is it your grandmother's recipe? It's my interpretation of it. What would she think? Fiona was quiet for a moment. She'd say I used too much butter. She paused. She'd be wrong. Grant smiled. She sounds like someone worth naming a restaurant after. She was. Fiona looked at the kitchen, the steel surfaces and the clean lines and the handwritten specials board on the wall by the past that Heather had talked her into, and she felt something shift. The fear didn't disappear, but it moved, made room for something bigger. We built something good here. You built something good. I wrote checks. You did more than that. He looked at her. The kitchen was quiet around them, the staff not yet in for the dinner shift, the whole room in suspension. Fiona, he said. Don't say something serious right now, she said. I'm already nervous. I just wanted to say, I know. She said it quietly. I know, later, okay, after service. He nodded. He stepped back. He went to do whatever he did before service. She'd learned that he walked the dining room alone, straightening things that didn't need straightening, and she turned back to her station and took a long breath. Service that night was the best of her career. Not perfect. 2 tickets backed up around 7:30. The fish course was slower than she wanted, and they ran out of the carrot butter that came with the bread service by 8 o'clock. But the room was full, and the kitchen ran and the food went out right. And at 9:50, when the last ticket came off the printer, she stood at the pass and looked at her team and felt something she could only describe as real. After service, after the debrief, after she'd sent everyone home and the kitchen was clean, she found Grant in the dining room. He was at the bar with 2 glasses of wine waiting. She sat down beside him. How did it feel? He asked. Like the first sentence of a long story, she said. He handed her one of the glasses. I'll take it. They sat there in the empty restaurant, the chairs still set from service, the city outside the windows doing what cities do, and she thought about a Tuesday night in a dark kitchen in Chicago with snow in someone's hair and a container of cold risotto, and how strange it was that things began the way they did. Not with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but with an unlocked door and someone in the wrong place at the right time. Earlier, she said, you were going to say something. Grant looked at her. He had the expression of a man who had prepared for this moment, and was now reconsidering everything he'd prepared. I was going to say that working with you these past 6 months has been the best professional experience of my career. That was the serious thing? There was more to it. Tell me the more. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past. Somewhere in the kitchen, the ice machine ran its cycle. I think I've been in love with you since you told me you know where the knives are, Grant said. Fiona looked at her wine glass. She thought about 40 conversations she'd had with herself since January, the patient, rational internal monologue of a practical person trying to talk herself out of something that wasn't practical, and how completely it had failed. That's an extremely low bar, she said. I have unusual taste. She looked at him. I think I've been in love with you since you said fair point. She set her wine glass down. Which annoyed me, for the record. Because it was charming. Because I was trying very hard to be unimpressed. He reached across the bar and put his hand over hers, and she let him, and the restaurant was quiet around them, the way a restaurant is quiet after a good night. Satisfied, used fully itself. 6 months later, someone tried to take the restaurant. His name was Russell Kane, and he was what the industry politely called a consolidator, and what Fiona called a man who bought things he didn't understand because he could afford to, and thought that was the same as deserving them. He had approached Grant twice before Tillman's opened, looking to absorb it into his hospitality group. Grant had said no both times. The fact that the restaurant had landed 3 strong reviews in its first 4 months, including a notice in the Tribune that described the roasted chicken as the dish Chicago should have had years ago, made Russell more interested, not less. What Russell did was subtle initially. A rumor circulated in the industry that Tillman's was a passion project. Code for financially unsound, code for not serious. Then a more pointed claim that the sourcing practices were overstated, that the farm relationships Fiona had built were marketing rather than reality. Then, most damagingly, a whisper to a food writer that the creative vision was Grant's, not hers, that Fiona Walsh was executing someone else's concept with a borrowed name. She found out about the last one from Heather, who had heard it from a pastry chef at another restaurant who'd had dinner with the food writer. She was standing in the walk-in cooler when Heather told her. The symmetry of it, coolers again where the real things happened, was not lost on her. How many people has this reached? Fiona asked. I don't know. Enough, she called Grant from the cooler. She told him what she'd heard. She expected him to be calm. He was almost always calm, but his voice when he responded was the quietest version of itself, which she had learned meant the opposite of calm. I'll call my lawyer tonight, he said. What can we do? We tell the truth and we document everything. You have emails, menu development notes, supplier contracts in your name. All of it. The record of this restaurant is your record, Fiona. Russell is betting that people won't look hard enough to find it. And if they don't, then we make them look. What followed was 3 weeks that she would not want to relive. The lawyer calls, the quiet dinners that were actually damage control conversations, the decision to do an interview with the food writer. Not to fight, but to simply open the kitchen and show the work. The notebooks going back 6 months. The supplier relationships she'd built in person. The recipe development files with dates and drafts. The menu written entirely in her handwriting on a whiteboard that they had photographed at every iteration. The food writer came. She spent 4 hours in the kitchen. She talked to the staff individually, without Grant or Fiona present. The piece ran on a Sunday. It was the kind of piece that didn't argue or defend. It just showed the kitchen, the sourcing visits, the notebooks, the staff, the food. It quoted Heather saying that Fiona Walsh was the most technically gifted and philosophically clear cook she'd worked with. It quoted the farmer who supplied their heritage pork talking about the afternoon Fiona had spent at the farm understanding how the animals were raised before she agreed to put them on the menu. Russell Kane did not respond to a request for comment which the piece noted in one sentence and then moved on. Fiona read it alone at 4 a.m. in the kitchen on her phone, sitting on the same overturned milk crate she'd found in the Milwaukee walk-in on her first day there. She called Grant. "You're awake," he said, not quite a question. "I read it. So did I. It's true," he said. "Same thing in your case." She put her phone down on the prep table after they hung up. The kitchen was dark except for the low counter lights they kept on overnight. Outside, the city was doing its before dawn thing. The strange quiet before the early shift at the bakery down the street, before the delivery trucks, before the world remembered to be loud. She sat there and she thought about her grandmother's kitchen in Tennessee, the cast-iron skillet that had been seasoned for 40 years and belonged to no one now because no one had thought to ask for it when her grandmother died, and how the simplest things were the hardest to hold on to, and how you had to fight for them even when fighting felt absurd. Then she stood up, turned on the lights, and started the prep list. On the 1-year anniversary of Tillman's opening, Fiona made the roasted chicken. She made it the way her grandmother had made it. No tweaks, no interpretations, no chef's embellishments. Good chicken, good salt, good fat, correct heat, correct time. She put it on the specials board in Heather's handwriting. Grandma Tillman's chicken, one night only. They sold out of it by 7:15. After service, Grant found her in the kitchen. He was holding a small box wrapped in brown paper, the kind of wrapping that means someone wrapped it themselves instead of having a store do it. "You didn't have to get me anything," she said. "I know. Open it." She opened it. Inside was her grandmother's cast-iron skillet. She stared at it for a long moment without speaking. "I tracked down your mother's sister," Grant said. "She had it in a storage unit. I asked if I could buy it. She said she'd rather give it to someone who would use it, and she sent it with a note." He reached into his jacket and produced a small envelope. "I haven't read it." Fiona took the envelope. She opened it. The note inside said, in the careful handwriting of a woman in her 70s, "Your grandmother always said you were the one who understood what food was for. I think she was right. Use it well." Fiona set the note down on the prep table. She picked up the skillet. It was heavier than she remembered. It was exactly as heavy as it should be. "Thank you," she said. Grant nodded. He didn't say anything else, which was one of the things she loved about him, the restraint, the understanding that some moments didn't need more words added to them. She set the skillet on the stove. She turned on the burner low. She watched the old iron begin to warm, decades of good cooking releasing themselves slowly into the air, and she thought that this was what it felt like to have built something worth keeping. The restaurant hummed around them. The city went on outside the windows, and for a while, neither of them said anything at all. Because there wasn't anything that needed saying that the skillet and the light and the warm kitchen air wasn't already saying better.